Hey everyone, welcome to this week's reading of Rune Marked with myself and pdmac. We'll just jump into it because you know the drill by now. Chapter 15, Gwen. Gwen stared at the name on the parchment. Could it be true? Had Tobias been correct in his guess about her heritage? No, it couldn't be. Yet here was a sliver of proof. Gwen didn't know what to say. Words and concise thoughts eluded her. Take a deep breath, Marjorie said. It's not every day someone learns they are born to royalty. Gwen nodded, trying to wrap her mind around the idea that she, a lowly barmaid, was in reality a princess. It's not possible, she said. The term would be improbable, Marjorie corrected. Nothing is impossible, especially where magic is concerned. But how? Wasn't King Cameron and the Queen murdered by King Torian? Yes, they were. Marjorie pursed her lips, which caused her wrinkled flesh to tighten, and Gwen thought she could imagine how the woman looked when she was a bit younger. There is something I want to show you. What is it? Gwen asked. It would be less impactful if I told you, so I will show you. Marjorie glanced at Emil. Unfortunately, I will require you to refrain from following, but you are free to explore the library at your will. Emil shrugged indifferently. Fine by me. Very well. Come along, Quinley, Marjorie said. Please just call me Gwen. The three of them left the room, and Marjorie turned to the right and continued down the hall. Gwen had to walk fast to keep up with her, which was surprising considering the old woman's age. Gwen glanced over her shoulder and saw Emil walking in the opposite direction. It pained her to have Emil out of her sight, but there was a little choice in the matter. There was a sorcerer who frequented the library many years ago, Marjorie said, drawing Gwen's attention. He was a recluse and always studied alone, spending much of his time learning herbology. Gwen wondered where Marjorie was going with her story and assumed she was just rambling. Others told me he tended a garden at his home, cultivating rare herbs from across the kingdoms for his potions. That's interesting, Gwen said, humoring the woman. It's rather boring, actually, Marjorie said, unless you are into herbology. Not really. I thought not. Remember that I do not tolerate deceit here. I'm sorry, Gwen said with embarrassment. Forgiven. Now, where was I? Oh, yes. Coggin went to Eisenthal to acquire a specific herb that only grows on the castle grounds. While he was there, Torian launched his coup. He killed his brother for the throne. Marjorie shook her head sadly. I don't remember that being part of the story, Gwen said. Then again, until now, the story of Torian's betrayal had never really been important to her. They were siblings, yes. I think most people don't talk about it because they don't want to think that a family member could ever do something so terrible to another. It is hard to stomach, Gwen agreed. Even so, Torian took the throne by force and murdered anyone loyal to Cameron. And did you hear that Cameron's children were murdered? Yes, I have heard that part of the tale before. That's wicked, and another reason why it is hard for me to believe I am Cameron's daughter. Gwen's stomach churned at the thought of someone murdering innocent children. I've said that I do not tolerate deceit in this library, and so I shall cast that lie from your mind. Cameron's children were not murdered. They weren't? No, Marjorie said. When Coggin realized what was happening, he was inside the castle proper in a guest room. He was about to flee when he heard the crying of a babe. It was your cries that stopped him in his tracks. He absconded with you and your brother. Gwen knew the story of Torian's betrayal. Anyone not living under a rock had heard it, but it always ended with the murder of Cameron's entire family, solidifying Torian's rule and claim to the throne. Wait, Gwen said, suddenly realizing what Marjorie had said. He rescued both children? Indeed, you and your brother, Darby. Darby? Gwen tried not to laugh, but the giggling erupted from her anyway. Cameron chose names that were different, to be sure. I'd say mortifying fits Darby and Quinley more than different. I'll stick with Gwen. Do as you wish, but if you want to enter the library in the future, you will have to use your true name. As they conversed, Marjorie led them down several hallways, traveling further into the depths of the library. Every time they passed another librarian, they would press their hands to their chest in reverence to Marjorie. Coggin, Gwen said, stumbling over the foreign name. Does he still come here? No, Marjorie answered. He died a few years ago. Oh. Gwen felt an odd sense of loss, even though she'd never met the man. Well, technically she might have. Marjorie seemed so convinced that she was the princess, but Gwen still had many reservations. He told you all of this, then? Not verbally. He sent for me when he was on his deathbed and gave me a book. At first, I assumed it was a collection of his potions that he wanted to leave to the library. There were some recipes in it, but more importantly, it held a detailed account of Torian's actions and Coggan's escape. The only thing missing was where he took you and your brother. Did he share that information with you? He did not share that information with anyone. A few days after the coup, Coggan came here, exhausted and looking like a man who'd walked over his own grave. He confirmed Torian's betrayal and said he rescued 2 children. When I pressed him for answers, he refused to divulge anything more. I wonder why he never told anyone their location, Gwen pondered aloud. Surely he knew somebody someday might need to know the information. Or he knew that someone who shouldn't have that information might come looking one day. I assume that's why he cut his own tongue out shortly after. Gwen stopped mid-step. Marjorie paused and looked at her, noting the horrified expression plastered across her face. Coggan took that secret to his grave, and I don't envy him for the things he saw that night. Many of these books are filled with tales of heroic deeds, but Coggan is the only hero I've ever known. I trust that you'll treasure what he did for you, and that you won't let his deed be wasted in vain. I have vowed to remove Torian from the throne and join myself with like-minded company, Gwen said. The more I learn about what happened, the more my hatred for Torian grows. They reached the end of the hall and stopped at a door that looked identical to the one that guarded the room that held the Stone of Truth. Marjorie removed the same key from her robes and unlocked the door. This is where we keep our most fragile books. Gwen followed her into the room. It was illuminated by several globes of light that rested upon pedestals every few feet. The pale light revealed the room was full of tall glass cases, all of them filled with books that looked like they would fall apart if a slight breeze rustled their pages. Marjorie walked over to one of the cases and opened it, carefully retrieving a plain leather-bound book and handed it to Gwen. The leather was worn from use, but it was in good condition compared to the other books. Read it, Marjorie said. Take your time. I can't risk letting you take the book from here, so you'll need to read it in this room. There's a table over there you can use. I have a few tasks to do while I'm in here, so just call for me if you need anything. There is one thing I need, Gwen said. She pulled the vial from her waistband and held it out to Marjorie. Would it be possible to figure out what was in this? Marjorie took the vial and held it up, peering at the small drops that remained in it. It's certainly not good, whatever it is, but I should be able to discern the contents. Thank you. Gwen took the book to the table and sat down. One of the globes was placed in the center of the table, providing plenty of light to read by. She gingerly opened the book and started from the first page. It was a recipe for a healing potion. The next page had one for stomach illness. Gwen continued flipping through the pages until she found the entry she was looking for. She inhaled a deep breath and prepared herself for what she was about to learn. In the final days of King Cameron's reign, Gwen read Coggan's first-hand account of the events that happened the night of the coup. The details were intense, and Gwen had to pause a few times to wipe the tears from her eyes. So many people had lost their lives, many more than Gwen would have imagined. Guards, servants, nobles, anyone with strong ties to Cameron had been hunted down and murdered outright. Many doubts were fluttering around in Gwen's mind about whether or not she was really the princess. She had the same name, but that wasn't proof she was one of the children Coggan had rescued. And then she read the description of the children. The girl had a birthmark on the bottom of her foot. It was a random shape, a splotch of brown on the arch. Gwen's heart lurched in her chest. She removed her boot and twisted her foot around to look at the mark she'd seen many, many times. It was the same as Coggan's description. Gwen swallowed hard. It was true. She was the princess, Cameron's long-lost daughter. She put her boot back on and digested the revelation. Nothing about it made sense, other than Boris's admission that he wasn't her real father. Gwen continued reading. Coggan didn't mention who he left the children with, but he did mention that each one went to a different home. I have a brother, Gwen whispered. She wasn't sure how she felt about that. A swirl of emotions overcame her. She was both angry and sad at having missed out on all the time with him, yet also jealous of how his life may have been. Was he raised by a wealthy noble, living a life of splendor? She would have loved a life of pampered living. Guilt assailed her for thinking such selfish thoughts. Boris had been a great father to her. She had never gone without. She offered a silent apology to Boris's ghost and closed the book. Gwen sat in silence for a long while, and eventually Marjorie joined her at the table. I'm stunned, Gwen said. It's difficult to believe, but there are so many things Coggan mentions that leaves little doubt as to who I really am. Life is about learning who you are. Every time you think you have it figured out, you find that you've changed again. The journey of self-discovery is one that never ends. I have a brother somewhere out there, Gwen said. motioning to the outside world. The chances of finding him are improbable, Marjorie said, smiling. Nothing is impossible, Gwyn repeated Marjorie's earlier words. I'll try to remember that. I know you have a lot on your mind now, but I must add to the burden. The vial you gave me, where did you get it? I found it in some bushes, Gwen said vaguely. Until she knew for certain that Emil was responsible, she didn't want to reveal too much to anyone. It was a possibility that Emil had merely found the vial, but Gwen wasn't sure that was the case. Marjorie obviously wasn't satisfied with the answer, but she didn't press the issue. I was able to determine what the liquid was. It's a mixture of poison and dark magic. I've seen similar poisons before, but this one was slightly different. The spells that were adhered to the liquid itself were intended to destroy. Seeing as there was only a few drops left, I must assume someone used it. I fear that whoever or whatever it touched is likely dead. Gwen nodded and kept her expression calm, but she was losing it on the inside. Magic was involved, which proved to Gwen that Emil had indeed poisoned the Thaystra River. Now she just had to figure out why. Thank you for looking into it, Gwen said. What did you do with the vial? I disposed of it and the poison. It was too dangerous to return it to you. That meant the evidence was gone. Gwen would have to find another way to offer proof of Emil's wrongdoing. On top of that, she didn't know who to report Emil's actions to. Eridor, perhaps? There's one more thing, Marjorie said. What is it? The council wants to see you.
Chapter 16, Connell. Connell and company were half an hour down the road when Lorcan came riding up. We need to pick up the pace, my lord. Catfin finally discovered you're no longer there. He was still marshaling his cohort when we left. With your permission, I'll lead the way. Go ahead, Connell readily agreed, praying he wasn't being led into another problem. An hour later, Lorcan veered off the main road onto a side road that led deeper into the forest, slowing the pace of the road narrowed and twisted. Drifting back to ride beside Connell, Lorcan raised himself up in the stirrups to look behind him. Though dark, he could make out the indistinct shapes of Torgrith and Galadir and several others behind the dwarf and elf. We should be clear in a little while, my lord. I have a few of my friends acting as decoys. They'll lead them well past the point where we enter the forest. Thank you. Back to my original question. Who are you? He yawned and rubbed his eyes. I'm Lorcan ap Dafydd. My father was your father's exchequer. When Torian usurped the throne, he kept my father in that position up until a year ago. He was accused of treason and thrown into the dungeon. His only treason was to question Torian's choice of confidants, especially Grimmer, who called himself the Mage Breaker. The man is a liar. Once my father was arrested, my family was no longer safe. My mother and sisters fled just before Torian's thugs arrived to arrest them too. I managed to escape and join the rebellion. That is where I met Drustin in Brioch. Drustin told me who you were. He paused and looked directly at Connell. I was 10 years old when Torian murdered your family. When no one found you or your sister, everyone assumed you too were killed by that butcher. I can only imagine the shock that Torian suffered when he discovered that you were not dead. Your father and your family? Lorcan shook his head and shrugged, gently rocking in the rhythm of the horse's gait. I do not know. I pray my mother and sisters are safe. My father? His voice trailed off. Connell understood. Most likely Lorcan's father was made to suffer, then killed in retribution for his family's escape. Deciding to change the subject, he calculated that Lorcan was 9 or 10 years older than he. You never married? Torian decreed that any marital arrangement of a member of his extended court, including the children, had to have the king's approval, which usually involved a large sum of money. Add to that directive that the king himself would arrange the marriages. While that improved the prospects of the homely and awkward children, others were not as fortunate, especially those families seeking to arrange appropriate matches, or anyone wanting to marry for love. So you never married, Connell repeated, disgusted with the malevolence of his father's murderer. His uncle. Torian is my uncle. The realization startled him. Up to now, Torian was simply an evil king, a man who needed to be destroyed so that peace and order could be restored. But now, Torian was a blood relative, a close blood relative. The thought burst within that he was on a quest to kill his uncle. How was that different from a brother killing his older brother? Connell's family in Irvine crowded into his musings, and he remembered the years growing up at the seaport and the unconditional love of a man and wife who placed his future above their own lives. He just didn't kill my royal father. He killed my real father, the man who raised me and loved me. He killed my family, the only family I ever had. Connell's resolve stiffened like cold, hard granite, and he understood what must be done. No quarter would be given, nor mercy offered. Like a rabid dog, the man needed to be put down. No, Lorcan answered. Connell knit his brow, struggling to remember the direction of the conversation. That's what happened when he was tired and needed sleep. Thankfully, Lorcan continued. I managed to avoid Torian's marriage entrapment. I absented myself from Havengard by joining the army, volunteered for border security, a job few wanted. Why? Lorcan chuckled. It's boring. Up until a year ago, just before my father was arrested, border security consisted of checking merchant wagons and chasing the occasional brigand. The rest of the time was spent dealing with pub owners complaining about soldiers damaging their pubs or bonding soldiers out of jail for drunkenness and fighting, and the occasional father threatening to kill the man who got his daughter pregnant. But truth be told, I'd rather be there than Havengard. And now? Now I'm part of the resistance, the rebellion to overthrow Torian before he enslaves us all. The rebellion is wider spread than many realized, and I think Torian is just now recognizing it. He again turned his head to look at Connell. That you are alive and well, and now assuming command of the rebellion gives us great hope and a fighting chance. Connell's jaw slacked open and then immediately clamped shut, hoping it was dark enough that Lorcan didn't see the shock in his face. Assuming command? Me? Now? He suddenly felt overwhelmingly inadequate. What do I know about grand strategy or leading an army? I thought Briac and Drustin were in charge. Yeah, he had talked a good game with Malwick, but now the heavy burden of leadership was dumped on him. And just as suddenly, confidence filled him. He could do this. He knew he had leadership talent when he had chafed under Oscon's domineering hand. More than once he had offered a plan, only to be told to shut up and remember his place, and then see Oscon use his plan and claim it was his idea. He remembered the last encounter with Oscon. It had felt good, it felt more than good to show the man that Connell was now in charge. Up ahead, a man stepped out into the path and now notched into his bow. Good morning, Commander Lorcan. Good morning. All quiet? Lorcan reined in his horse, causing everyone else behind him to stop. Yes, sir. Good. How did you know who we were? We could hear you coming, Commander. By the conversation, we assumed you were talking with Prince Darby. That's Prince Connell, Connell sternly corrected. He shot an angry glance at Lorcan. My name is Connell. Anyone called me Darby, I'm going to reach down his throat and rip his heart out. Yes, my lord, Lorcan soothed. I'll put the word out. My apologies, my lord, the man said with a startled bell. I didn't know. I understand. Connell turned to Lorcan. Where are we? We're at my camp, my lord. We are safe here. It's time for you to get some rest. He led the way past the sentries, staying on the path, the forest on both sides. Expecting to see a campfire or two, Connell was surprised that not only were there no campfires, he couldn't tell how many were encamped. Yet the longer they plodded along, the more he wondered how large Lorcan's force was. How many do you have here? Well, almost 3,000. 3,000, Connell exclaimed. Yes, my lord. I know it might not seem much, but with the dwarven force under King Rorcan and the arm of King Kilmarin, we probably have over 10,000 soldiers ready to heed your command. Once again, Connell's mouth gaped open. 10,000 soldiers submitting to his command. By the gods, what have I gotten myself into? Overwhelmed, fatigue flushed through him. Yet he knew he had to act like a leader, even when he was bone tired. They emerged to a small clearing and stopped before a marquee tent with scalped edging, large enough to house 4 or more individuals. Lorcan dismounted and waved a hand at the tent. This is for you, my lord. The whole thing? Yes, my lord. Dismounting, Connell frowned at the size of the tent. Someone had to set it up, take it down, and pack it for travel. This is too big. Where'd you find it? Lorcan hid a grin. It was donated, my lord. What about the rest of my friends? They'll all be taken care of. They can stay with me, if that is what you wish, my lord. Where are you bedded? Close by, my lord. He pointed to a wall tent less than half as large as to the left. Maltic strode up, leading his horse. With your consent, my lord, Lorcan said, I place your commander in this tent here. He pointed to a tent similar to his on the other side of Connell's tent. Once the arrangements were settled and the 3 more cots brought into Connell's tent, Lorcan bid him good night and went to check his security. Connell pulled a flap side to his tent and entered, followed by Torgith, Briac, and Galadir. A small brazier on a field table gave dim light to the interior, where 4 cots with cotton stuffed mattresses on top were positioned. The sight of a comfortable bed was all Connell needed, and he made a beeline for the farthest cot, sat down, yanked off his boots, and flopped back, yielding a sigh of contentment, and was quickly asleep. It was late morning when he woke, his stomach growling. Sitting up, he noted with satisfaction that his tent mates were still asleep. Pulling his boots on, he quietly stepped between the cots and slipped through the tent flap into the warm morning sunshine. The camp was deceptively quiet, the sign of disciplined soldiers. That surprised him, for there were probably more civilians than soldiers in Lorcan's army. He was about to go look for something to eat, if there was still anything left, from breakfast, when a young man approached carrying a tray with a mug of ale and a plate of steaming eggs and sausage. Good morning, my lord, the young man said with a smile. It's not much, but I hope it meets with your satisfaction. He was a slender lad in his mid-teens, with curly blonde hair and bright eyes, like he was on some wonderful adventure. Connell's mouth watered, and his eyes lit up. This looks excellent, thank you. Accepting the tray, he glanced around for a place to sit. I'll go get you a chair, my lord. He started to turn before Connell stopped him. I'm fine, thank you. He strode over to sit against an oak tree, crossing his legs and inhaled the aroma of hot food. This was far better fare than when he was with Oscon. Even the sleeping arrangements far exceeded anything Oscon ever found. Are you sure, my lord? I'm positive, thank you. The young man dipped his head. I'm Beto, my lord. If you need anything at all, I will get it for you. Thank you, Beto, Connell said with a chuckle. I'm fine. The young man certainly had enthusiasm. When Beto didn't wander off, but simply stood to the side, Connell repeated, I'm fine, Beto. You can go about your work. I am, my lord. I am your runner, your personal assistant, your servant. Beto grinned like there's nothing better in the world for him to do. You are. Connell slipped the ale and then sliced a bit of sausage. The ale was surprisingly good, especially here in the field. Yes, Lord my lord. Beto swallowed hard at his first faux pas. Connell stopped mid-chew and pointed the knife at him, his eyes narrowing with an intense stare. If I hear anyone calling me or even referring to me by that name, I will slice his throat and feed it to the ravens. My name is Connell, C-O-N-A-L. Got it? Yes, my lord, Beto said in a rush. I'm so sorry. I'll never do it again, I promise. When Connell saw the fear in the man's eyes, he relaxed. Apology accepted. Let's forget about it. Tell me, Beto, where do you hail from, and how is it you are here with Commander Lorcan? He piled a portion of eggs on top of the bite of sausage. I'm from just outside Havagard, my lord. I'm here because King Torian murdered my family. The light briefly departed from his eyes. Connell locked his gaze on him and softly intoned, just like he did mine, both of them. Beto frowned in puzzlement. Both of them, my lord? Yes. First, he murdered my mother and father and usurped the throne. Then he murdered the family who put their lives at risk to raise me safely. So it's true, Beto marveled. You really are the king. Not yet, Connell replied with a smile. But with the help of men like yourself and Lorcan and others, I hope to reclaim what is mine. Lorcan walked up, looking refreshed and content. Good morning, my lord. Sleep well? Very, Connell said with a cheerful grin. Is Vito taking good care of you? Yes, thank you. He and I were just getting acquainted. He's a miller's son, so he's not acquainted with the finer points of the royal retainer. I'll search for someone more suitable as time goes on. Out the corner of his eye, Connell saw Vito put a brave smile, though he was crestfallen. Actually, I prefer to leave things the way they are. Vito strikes me as an intelligent young man and will fit the bill admirably. Besides, we may have more important things to worry about than looking for retainers when we have the one right here. Vito's disappointment morphed to hope that Connell's word outweighed Lorcan's. It will be as you wish, my lord. Connell smiled, pleased that Connell was not like so many other pompous asses of royalty whose disdain for the common man often revealed their own glaring shortcomings. We did have an interesting incident during the evening, my lord. Yes? Connell chewed the last bite and swigged down the last bit of ale, handing off the tray to Vito as he stood. Thank you, Vito. You're welcome, my lord. Accepting the tray, he turned to go clean the plate and mug. You've made him very happy, my lord, Lorcan observed as Vito strutted away. I like him. He's enthusiastic. Lorcan chuckled. That he is. Like I said, he's a miller's son. His parents were murdered when they couldn't pay the increased poll tax. They were supposedly used as an example to all the others who had second thoughts about sequestering enough to feed themselves. We picked him up on the road to Rexford. How he managed to get that far is anyone's guess. He's resourceful. You were saying about an incident, Connell reminded him. Yes. He motioned with his hands for Connell to follow him. We captured 4 individuals trying to infiltrate our perimeter. They're not soldiers, they're not local. When questioned, they claimed they were dragon hunters. He abruptly stopped and tilted his head to give Connell a look of disbelief. They claimed we had a dragon with us.
Dun, dun, dun. The plot continues to thicken. All right, that's it for this week. So if you're following but you're not subscribed, make sure you subscribe and follow along as we continue through book 2. See you guys next week.